Hello and welcome to the third episode of Let's Get Quilting. My name is Maureen and I'm a quilter and I'm here to help you make a quilt. So in the first two episodes we talked a great deal about where to buy fabric, how to cut your fabric out, and we also talked a great deal about the sewing machine, the importance of small little maintenance in your sewing machine, and also the very important business of keeping 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, as all quilt patterns will ask you for 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then there's the variant of a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we can get into that later. The really important part is the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, because without that your quilt blocks will be off, and trust me on this one, you don't want that. The other thing that we talked about at the end of the second episode was the 9-patch block, and this is our first block that we have been able to make. There's just the same colors, they're just in a different arrangement, and they make the block look different. And I love that about that. So we have a couple of blocks started and we're on the road to make some more. So the next block that we're going to conquer is called the Old Maid's Puzzle. And I've made a couple of samples of it, and here it is. Again, same colors, just different placement. And doesn't that make a world of difference? I love how that does that. It's like you're looking at two different blocks. I love it. So today we are going to make this, and a lot of it is leftover strips that you had before, and we're going to cut some new ones. And I'm also going to introduce 2 other colors, because I like to have a quilt that maybe has 4 colors in it, and this one I'm going to have 4 colors in it. So, onward. The Old Maid Puzzle block requirements are this. You are going to cut 2 strips, 1 light, 1 dark, 3 7/8 inch wide. You're also going to use a 3.5 inch strip. Now you may have leftovers from your original 9-patch block, those strips, and if you do, we can use them on this block, and if you don't, I'm going to show you an easy way to get there. From the light fabric that you've cut 3 7/8 strips, you are going to cut 3 7/8 squares. You're going to cut 3 7/8 dark squares from your dark strip of fabric. And then you are going to take a light or your dark, whatever you depend, and you need a 3.5 inch square. And you need 3 of those. So you need 3 of each of these. And I am going to show you how to get there. So these are my strips all cut out. These are my 3.5 inch strips, and these are my 3 7/8 inch strips. I will make my cuts. I am going to cut from the 3.5 inch strips. I am going to cut 3 solid pieces. From my 3 7/8 inch strip, I'm going to cut 3 out of the light and 3 out of the dark. And then we're going to put the puzzle together, because we're going to work on a new technique called a half square triangle. As I mentioned, if you did not have leftover 3.5 inch strips, you can easily achieve this by first cutting your 3 7/8 inch strip. And this is cut 3 7/8 inch. That's sometimes difficult to say. So what I am going to do is at the fold, right here at the fold, I am going to cut my strip in half. So I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut it right on the fold. So now I have one 3 7/8 inch strip, And this other one, to achieve the 3.5-inch strips, I am going to reduce this to 3.5 inches. So that way I didn't use a whole strip. I'm only going to use, which I only need half. And as I said, us quilters were pretty frugal in our fabric because it is costly. And we want to get the most out of our money. When I have some fabric that I need to cut out, and I need to cut out multiple ones, blocks or shapes, I tend to try to minimize my time cutting. So these two fabrics, these are the 3 7/8, and I need 3 of each. So what I am going to do is place one on top of the other and make sure, it doesn't matter if it's right side or wrong side, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is that we have a nice clean edge to cut from. So again, I'm going to use that old thing of lining up my fabric so that I can cut a strip. And this ruler is not big enough. So I'm going to use a little bigger ruler. So I want to cut just the edge, a teeny bit of the edge. And now I have a nice fresh edge to cut my strips inward. So 3 7/8 is right almost next to the 4 mark. It's the last little mark before the number 4. And again on the vertical and on the horizontal. So there's my 3 7/8, and it's all lined up. And now I have 2 strips. And I'm going to make 3 of those. Okay. So now we have our 3 light at 3 7/8, and we have our 3 dark at 3 7/8. And we also have 3 solid dark for the old maid puzzle. So now we have all of our squares cut, and we're going to start to learn a new technique. This is what I mean when I talk about the half square triangle. This is the half square triangle, this block right here. And what it is the light and dark 3 7/8 square sewn together, cut in half, equals a half square triangle. So here it is. And we are going to make 6 of those. Here is my 3 7/8 inch squares. There's a light and a dark. I am going to place them right sides together, and then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to mark on the light side, because I do it in pencil. I'm going to mark from top to bottom, corner to corner. I usually do twice, just in case. Okay? Once we have them all marked, corner to corner on all 3, a light and a dark, then we are going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew. Now here's the tricky part. We're not going to sew on the line. We are going to sew 1/4 of an inch over from the line. We're using that line as a guideline, so we want 1/4 of an inch outward, and then on this side 1/4 of an inch outward. And then we're going to come back here and cut. But let's do one step at a time. Here we are at my favorite part, the sewing, which we all strive to get to. During quilting, you're going to find that there are certain aspects you like and then certain aspects you're not crazy about. I love buying fabric. Just ask my husband. I also love finding pattern that is perfect for the fabric that I've bought. I get such joy in that. I also get joy in putting the pieces together. What I'm not crazy about sometimes is the cutting and pressing. Not crazy about pressing. Not at all. Never have been. But it is an intricate part of putting a quilt together. So we all put up with certain things, and I put up with ironing. But the fun part for me is certainly the sewing, and that's what we're going to do right now. So as I talked about, we have the 3 dark, 3 light, 7 3/8 inch squares with a line down the middle of corner to corner on the light side. And now we are going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of that line that I drew. So this is again where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is very important. We figured out where on our sewing machine 1/4 inch seam allowance was by moving the needle over to the right and kept testing until we found the exact 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if I take my regular presser foot, my one standard one that comes with the machine, and now I know that if I line my fabric up to the edge of this presser foot, because I've determined where my 1/4 inch seam is, I can line up my line that I drew on my fabric to the edge of this presser foot, and I will come out with 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of that line. I'm also going to use the leaders that we talked about. So they're going to start the process, and then I'm going to bring in my 3 7/8 inch square. So here we go. I'm going to put my needle down. I'm also going to turn my machine down to a very low, slow pace. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that I'm going to stay on that line. Sometimes quilting takes a little bit longer because we want to get it accurate and not, like me, ripping out a lot of seams. So I'm going to line up the edge of my foot right on that line that I drew. Start my machine. And when I get to the end of the machine, I'm going to be able to put the next piece in. I don't have to put a leader, I just have to put the next piece on. And that's going to save me time. So again, I'm going to line up the edge of my foot to the line and sew. But here's the line that we've sewn, and it's 1/4 inch from the line that we drew. So we are now going to make 1/4 inch on the other side. So let me get to that. So here we have our 2 1/4 inch seams sewn from away from the drawn line. So here's the drawn line, 1/4 inch this way, 1/4 inch this way is both seams. And now what we are going to do is we are going to cut on that drawn line. So what we are going to do is we are going to cut on the line that we drew, corner to corner. Get my ruler and line it up right on the line that I drew. Take my rotary cutter, and now I have 2 half square triangles. Here we have all of our half square triangles, and they are now pressed to the dark side. And one thing that you need to do prior to sewing them together is we're going to cut off these, what they call dog ears. So we're going to cut those off equal to the line of the end of the fabric. And now we can start to sew our fabric together. This is my finished product that I want to achieve. This is the Old Maid's Puzzle block. These are my pieces that will allow me to make this block. What I like to do is I like to either have a block that's made in front of me, or if it's a quilt pattern, I have the pattern in front of me so that I know where my pieces belong in the block. The other thing that I wanted to say, and I had forgotten to, is when you are putting your right sides together to make your half square triangles, make sure they are right sides together, because when I was making the practice block, I went and sewed them and cut them and then realized that one of mine was right side and the other one was on the wrong side. So I had to use my friend the seam ripper and cut it out and re-sew it. So I always try to recheck my work, but if I'm in a hurry, I do sometimes, like all of us, make mistakes. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the pieces aligned where I'm going to use them. So my first block, the dark side is up. My second block, the dark side is up. And I'm going to sew these two together. Right sides together. Put my leader in, start sewing. And here are my first two blocks sewn together. Now I am going to put a dark color block next to it, and that will finish off my first row, just as in the pattern that we see here. And here I have my first row completed. Now I'm going to continue this process in following the pattern so that I know the placement of the blocks, and once I get my 3 rows together, then I will iron them prior to putting the rows together. Here are all my rows sewn together and in the order in which they need to be placed, sewn row to row. What I have also done is ironed them. Now if you notice, I ironed them each row in the opposite direction. So in the first row, the ironing goes this way. In the second row, it goes opposite. And in the third row, it goes opposite to the second. And again, that is used to reduce the amount of bulk when we go to sew them together and when we go to quilt them. So now what I am going to do is I am going to sew these rows together to make our block. And here we have the finished block. So wow, how wonderful is that? The other thing that I wanted to show you on the back is as I said, when I press the rows, I press them in opposite directions. When I press after I sew the rows together, I press the seams open. There is some bulk. There's nothing you can do about that. But this will reduce some of it. So that's what we're trying to achieve. So how great is that? We now have 2 blocks completed. So here they are, all 4 of them together. And I think they look pretty nifty. I hope you can see them. So on our next episode, we are going to make the Ohio Star. And let me zoom in so you can see it. And this star has what they call, on this, 1/4" triangles. We mastered the half square triangle, and this is going to be the 1/4 square triangle. So we have that to look forward to next episode. So that concludes our episode number 3. And we've made our old maid puzzle blocks in a variety of colors. And now next episode we're going to make the Ohio Star. And I will see you then when we Let's Get Quilting.